There's a lot that we don't talk about, sometimes due to embarrassment, fear, insecurities. We neglect discussions about the most common parts of our lives, things we all deal with, sometimes every day. But on the Caffeinated Gypsy podcast, together, we'll break all of those taboos and talk open and honest about shared experiences. Knowledgeable people relating things you felt but never put into words. Parenting, sex, fitness, energy, anything to connect you to your authentic self, unfiltered. Now, the Caffeinated Gypsy herself, a free spirit, world traveler with a passion for fitness and exploring topics that others might avoid. Hello, and welcome to the Caffeinated Gypsy podcast. I'm Stephanie Cotton, your host. Thank y'all for being with me today. So today is a really good day astrologically. So we have something, we talk about aspects, how the planets interact with each other. So today, the sun is actually trine with Jupiter. So it's a really good day. So I feel really, really good. Anytime the sun is trine with Jupiter, we're talking like just uplifted, good mood, lots of opportunities, spiritual expansion. So I thought today would be a really good day to talk about past lives. And it's something I've been wanting to do for a while, but you know, as I always tell you guys, I have to be like energetically in the right space, and I wanted to make sure I really compiled everything for you guys that I wanted to say. So pretty excited to talk about past lives because this is something I'm super passionate about right now. Some updates for you guys. Lots of updates actually. I have my own mug coming out, the Caffeinated Gypsy Soul. You can find that on my website, or you can go on Instagram, Caffeinated Gypsy. So I'm really excited about the mug one because it's something I've wanted to do for a really long time. But the thing about the mug is, if you haven't seen my stories, I'm in the process of working on my own coffee line. And so the proceeds from the mug are going towards, all of the stuff that you need to start a coffee line, because there's a lot of stuff that goes into all of that. So I'm really, really excited about that. If you guys pay any attention to me, coffee is huge in my life. And I'm actually going to do a whole podcast about just coffee and like the magical properties of it and how I use it as a ritual practice and things like that. But it's something that I feel really passionately about. I've been roasting my own beans for several years now. And so I have been taking all of my other, skills, and I always think about how can we can use energy and we can raise vibration. And so coffee is something that already has a very high vibration. It actually is astrologically ruled by Mars, so there's a lot of energy in coffee. So I've been playing around with things for a long time, charging my coffee and blessing my coffee and doing all these things. And I've seen a huge difference in just how I feel when I drink my coffee. And, I do all these little experiments with energy. I go out and drink coffee other places, and then I come home and drink coffee, and I try to just see if I can feel a difference. And then I started noticing a huge difference just from going places where I know the people are getting a good quality coffee and where the people that are growing the coffee are treated well. And so I started noticing by doing that my coffee tasted different. So long story short, I'm going to be releasing some small batches of my own coffee in the coming months. And so the mug is helping to fuel that. And then, I'm really excited about that. And I think the mug itself, I just love the mug. I have another one that's going to be coming out in a couple of months. I'm working to get the exact mug design that I want, because all of this stuff is very, very complicated. You would think it would be really easy, but it's not. And I'm pretty good at graphic design myself, but anytime printing comes into the mix, it's always a huge pain in the ass for me, and it stresses me out immensely, which is why I had all this stuff on the back burner during Mercury in retrograde, but I didn't want to actually send anything to the printers. And I had some snafus with printing. So at any rate, that's coming and I'm really excited. So pay attention to the stories. When this does come out, I'm only doing small batches to start with. So pay attention because we're talking like I'm probably only going to release 10 bags at a time. Because I want to keep everything small. I want to keep a really good quality coffee. I want to make sure that I'm able to charge everything and do all the things that I want to do with it. So pay attention for that. What else is happening? If you're in the Raleigh area, I have an event. Hopefully that'll be officially announced this week on Instagram that I'm going to be doing in Raleigh. I think we're still trying to nail down the exact location, but that's going to be with the full moon. So as soon as those details are out, I will announce it on Instagram, but I'm really excited to be working in conjunction with the Hura Project, and we're going to be doing a night of sound healing and yoga and all of that good stuff. So if you want to come hang out with me, that's going to be a super fun event. And then I'm also planning some stuff for the fall. So fall is always my busiest, most active time. Energetically, it's really, really good for me. So I'm really excited about that. What else? Oh, yes. Watch my stories. I have some other really cool stuff that I'm working on right now. I have been experimenting with making elixirs and flower essence with crystals. So pay attention to my stories. I think you're going to see some really cool stuff coming out, especially for fall. So one of the things I'm really working on is just harnessing the sun right now, because I personally suffer from seasonal depression. And so I'm going to do a whole podcast on like working with, stones and flowers and things like that. But I'm working on creating some things where I can actually like harness the energy and put it into a tincture so that I can carry it with me into winter to help me on those days where I'm really struggling with my depression. So, yeah, I have lots of stuff happening right now. I'm really excited about it. As far as other things, past life regression, we're about to talk about that. If you want to book a service with me, you can go to my website. It's caffeinatedgypsy.com. Go to my services and everything will be on there. If you ever just want to jump to it, you can go to the products page. All of my services are on the products page. If you want to go ahead and pre-order your mug, those are very limited. I only did a small batch of those as well. So if you want to grab that so that you can make sure you have yours, caffeinatedgypsy.com, go to products, and the pre-sale is on there. I think that's it. And then obviously, like if you want to get your natal chart done, same thing. All right. That's all the updates right now. Past life regression. Let's talk about this. So if you've listened to some of my other podcasts, this is something I've talked about several times roundabout, but I was like, this is something that has just like blown my mind in my work lately. And I've been wanting to talk about it, but I'm also been super overwhelmed because I'm like, you reach these points in your life and you're like, this is it. This is what I've been waiting for. This is what I've been waiting for. And you guys have heard me talk about like what I've gone to school for and things like that. And sometimes I do things and I just feel like I'm supposed to do them, but I don't know why. And then these like, lightning bolts or epiphanies come out and then I'm like, oh, that makes sense. But a lot of times I'm 100% just going on like intuition and gut, and everybody around me is like, well, what the fuck are you doing, Stephanie? And I'm like, I don't know, but I've got to do this. And so this is kind of the past life regression for me personally. Everything has led me to this like moment of doing this work. So if you're new to my podcast, definitely go back and listen to my introduction podcast, Getting to Know Me, because I answer some of the questions just about like my background and education. But one of the things that I've always been super passionate about is just healing, like healing on every level, which has led me down a billion different roads. And I'm a Sagittarius moon and I'm a Sag rising. So I get really like into things and I like try to explore everything. And so what I have realized is part of my journey is helping other people work through and heal in this lifetime. And so it's taken me down so many different roads. And there's been moments where I'm like, I learn everything I can about something. And then I'm like, okay, I've learned it all, but like, this isn't quite it. And which is why, I've been a massage instructor and all of that stuff, because I'm like, I'm really passionate about it. But then I'm like, God, there's just something missing. And so many, many years ago, I started my own healing journey. And one of the things that always kind of like was in the back of my mind was like past lives. I've always been fascinated with it. Even when I was a child, I can remember the first time I learned about like Buddhism, and they believe in like reincarnation and stuff. I was fascinated by that. But at the time I was a Jehovah's Witness, and it was like a big, huge taboo. But I can remember very young, like being super fascinated, and like it just made sense to me. Even though everybody around me was like, no, that's not how it works. Like you go to heaven, or you're, whatever your belief system was. Ours was that you were on like a paradise on earth and all this crazy shit. But to me, past lives always just made so much sense. Like, I could never really wrap my head around the fact that the soul either was just dead or it went to like just heaven and that was it. And so as I got into my own healing journey, I just knew that there was like more to it. So I've shared my experience in the past about past lives, but I started my own past life regression probably like 7 years ago now. And it was in the middle of my Saturn return, which is interesting because a lot of times when I work with people, a lot of people are like in their Saturn return doing like past life regression. And I think that's just what I happen to attract because that was really powerful for me. But Saturn return, if you're not familiar with that, is in astrology. Saturn takes 30 years to go through your chart. So during those 30 years, the goal is that we're working through our karma from our past life. And so as we get closer to Saturn returning, we start to feel really like kind of like, okay, like what am I doing with my life? And we start to look at our belief systems and all these things that have happened. But what also is happening is we have a lot of past life recall that kind of comes up and we don't even know it because patterns are what's coming up, because Saturn is all about karma and patterns and fixing things. And so if we've been doing something in our lives and it's not being like fixed, we really start to feel that during Saturn returns. And so if we don't work on those things, then they just continue. And then a lot of times it'll show back up during our second Saturn return, which is, in our 50s, close to 60. And we just keep repeating the same thing over and over again. So for me personally, I started to have things pop up during my Saturn return. And I'm almost like too open, I think, to things sometimes because I'm very much like, once I see it, I can't unsee it. So I knew that I had some stuff like from past lives. I just knew it. I could feel it. And then I started to feel like I had to be in California. And so even as a child, I can remember like being in California and being like, I've lived here or I'm going to live here. It was just something I knew very, very adamantly. And so when I had the opportunity, I just was like, we have to move to California. And you listen to my old podcast, I've shared like how rapidly all of it happened. I literally one day was like, we should move to California. And then within like 3 months, we were living in California. And we're talking like at the time, no jobs or anything. So I felt very strongly that there was a reason I was supposed to be in California. And that's where I started to really uncover some very traumatic life events from my past life. But it all started to make sense. So I had lived in a past life. My last past life, I lived in California. And long story short, I had ended up having a baby. It died. And then I ended up committing suicide by jumping off of a cliff. And so what's interesting is that at the time, I felt like my life was unraveling. And that's kind of how it happens sometimes. I was taking out or reprogramming myself. And so all of these old patterns that I'd been carrying around for actually lifetimes were just coming to the surface. And I was like, okay, I have one or two choices. I can like ignore this, or I can peel back these layers and see what the fuck is going on. And so I knew past life regression was something I had to do. And I also knew that it was going to be very painful. And it was. So I got past life regression and I got clarity to some of the things I had just been seeing and noticing. And very quickly, as I was in this past life regression, I felt everything again. And it was like, like when you have like a memory and like you kind of remember it, but you're like, I don't know, did that really happen? This was that. It was like there was something there, and it was like somebody like took off the blinder, and it was like bam, and all of a sudden, like I felt everything. I felt everything that I had experienced, and I was like literally like in that moment. But it gave me so much clarity at the time. I had some serious guilt over having committed suicide, and that had been a reoccurring theme in this life. Like I had dealt with my mom and suicidal tendencies, so suicide was something that I had a lot of fear of. I had a huge fear of losing a child. I actually did have a miscarriage in this lifetime, and it was very traumatic, just like that life. And then the relationship that I was in that past life was something where I had abandoned that person, and I carried a lot of guilt, and then I was abandoned in this life. So there was just all these things that had kind of correlated together. And so I got a lot of clarity. But what happened is it also, for me, it turned everything upside down, because I had been living my life kind of ignoring things for a while, and now it was like, okay, here's everything that you've been repeating, and now you've got to sort of work through that. So from a personal standpoint, there was so much clarity, but also, you know, from a relationship standpoint, it was really difficult, because I was, you know, having to process all this stuff. I was having to go through all this stuff, and it wreaked havoc on my personal relationship. Not to mention he was also, you know, going through a lot of his own stuff. So it was very difficult, but I'm so grateful for it, because I got clarity, and I finally was like, okay, this is so much more than just this lifetime. This is like lifetimes of patterns that I've been repeating. And so it made a lot more sense to me. I have Saturn retrograde in my chart. So anytime you see Saturn retrograde in your chart, that's definitely a sign that there's some past life stuff. So Saturn retrograde in your chart, your natal chart, is what I call post-traumatic stress disorder from a past life. It leaves you with this undertone of constant anxiety and stress and fear. And even though I've had a decent amount of trauma in my life, there's been times where I'm like, okay, like, why do I have this irrational fear? In fact, I even went to counseling when I was pregnant with my daughter, because I was like, I am like petrified. Like, and I'd have all these crazy scenarios go through in my mind, and she was like, you have PTSD. And I was like, PTSD? Like at the time, I was like, that's only for people that have been to like war or something. She was like, no, you have PTSD from this, and this in this lifetime. And I was like, that makes sense. But then when I started doing past life regression, I started realizing like, well, if you can have PTSD in this lifetime, surely we can carry PTSD over if we've never dealt with it. And so as I've kind of gone through my own like academic studies through the years, I've started to piece things together. And I took this class back in California, and it was Somatic Experiencing, which was by Peter Levine. And if you've never read anything by Peter Levine, I highly recommend it. He has this whole entire system of healing called Somatic Experiencing, where he actually helps you release trauma from the body. And so in his system, he believes that trauma that doesn't get to release actually stays stuck in the body, and it gets into your cells and creates, energy blockages, but also manifests in physical symptoms. And so he's done a ton of work over the last, I think 30 or 40 years, even just working with vets and things like that. And it's fucking amazing. But I started really getting just curious on trauma. And so when I started taking that, it just started making sense to me. I'm like, so in the wild, animals, when they go through trauma, what they do is when they're in a traumatic experience, they shake and they release everything, right? So that's why animals can go through traumatic experiences, but they don't have PTSD, because they actually discharge all that trauma. So they'll shake and they'll yell and they'll do all these things to discharge that energy. Well, as humans, we go through trauma, and very rarely do we go through those stages of actually discharging it. And so when I started doing past life regression, I started thinking about this. I'm like, if we can have PTSD in this life, if we can have trauma stuck in ourselves in this life, why wouldn't we carry that over from a past life, right? It only makes sense. And so I started realizing that this was something that I had carried over. And so I'm not only dealing with this life's trauma, but I'm dealing with the past life's trauma. And so when you start pulling up past life regression, or past lives, in this regression modality, that's what you're doing, is you're starting to realize like, okay, I am carrying PTSD with, I have this PTSD. I'm carrying all this shit with me. This is literally embedded in my soul. I have this karmic tie to this trauma. And so now we can start cutting that tie and we can start healing that. And so everybody does past life regression very differently. In fact, when I got past life regression, I think it was something I needed to go through from my own experience, but it was not nothing like how I do it now. It was very much like I went through the regression. It was like, here you go. Here's all this information. Have a great day. And it was very traumatic for me at the time, because I was already kind of struggling and trying to figure things out. And I was in the midst of all this, Saturn returns. And then it was like, boom, here's this information. But I didn't have any kind of guidance in working through that, or how do I heal this, or how do I let go of this, or whatever. So I spent a good year kind of a hot fucking mess because of it. And I'm grateful for it now, because obviously I needed that journey, and it's led me to this moment now where I'm working with people and I approach past life regression very, very differently than how I experienced it. But what it did is I kind of backed off of past life regression for a long time. It was always in the back of my mind, but that moment was so traumatic for me. And at the time I was like, this is like unraveled everything I know. And so I wasn't super keen to jump back into it. And so it's been the last couple years, it's really been coming back up, and really feeling like I needed to work with people in past life regression, because I was like, it definitely was huge in my life, but also I wanted to take my spin and offer a healing modality as part of this. So that's what I've been doing. And so when I do past life regression with people, there's a few ways that I'm looking at this. Is one, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I know that there's people that look at charts and probably see past life. I don't know if other people are looking at charts and going, oh, here's your past life. Let's do past life regression. Because I've really been trying to just hone in on my own craft. So I'm not saying I'm the only person doing this, but I don't know how other people do it, because I don't really want to know, because I feel like for me, this is how I do it, and it works for me, and it feels very, very right. And I feel like this is something I've probably done in many lifetimes. So I can only speak to how I do it. So I look at charts, and there's things I just see in charts. Like I know that if something's retrograde, this is something that's been done again. I always look at where Chiron sits in the natal chart, and I always look at the north node and south node in the chart. And that's not to say that if you want to do a past life regression with me, I have to have seen your chart. I can do past life regression with you without ever seeing your chart. But that's just things that pop out to me, because I'm always looking for how can somebody, better themselves or heal themselves. So that's just my life's purpose, is to give people tools. So that's what I look at when I look at charts. So I'm looking at Chiron, I'm looking at Saturn, I'm looking at Pluto, I'm looking at North Node, South Node, and then that usually, depending upon whether they're retrograde, depending upon what house they sit in, depending upon what sign they're in, this starts to give me an indication if there's past life trauma. And so most of the time, once I see this, I always share that during a session. Then when we go into a past life regression session, it kind of gives us somewhere to start. Now, if you don't have that information, that's not even that big of a deal, because what I like to do is when I do past life regression, I always like set the intention of asking your soul, what does it need to do? So we'll do something like, we're going to go back to the moment that was significant in, creating patterns or trauma in this current life. And it's always just, every single time we do this, it blows my mind, because I don't really believe you can fake this shit. It's so very obvious to me that people are immersing themselves in this, and, people have very physical reactions. People become very emotional. I can see it on their facial expression, their body changes, like everything. And so what happens is, the way past life regression works for me is I take you through a series of exercises that help get you in a very, very relaxed state. So it's hypnosis. And then we go to like a safe place, and then we go into like your past life. And so as we're in these past lives, I'm able to, allow you to explore these moments. And usually you're going to go into very quickly, very significant moments. It's different for everybody. Everybody can be hypnotized if they want to be. Everybody has the capability of accessing this information. It's on a very subconscious level. We all have these memories. We all have these patterns that we're able to tap into, but it's whether we're open enough. It's whether our third eye is open. It's whether we're ready for it. Sometimes we're not ready. Sometimes people have to stay in this lifetime. So there's people that may go in to do past life regression, but their trauma is so significant from this life that their soul needs to clear that up before they can go backwards. It's very different for everybody. And which life you go back to is very different for everybody. We can set the intention to be like, I want to go back to my very last life. I typically work with people who are trying to stop patterns, and they want to clear things up. So we typically will go back to the life of origin for the whatever pattern that we're working with, or karmic tie. So I like to go through that because I feel like it's so much easier to just kind of get to the root of the problem and start working on healing that. And so we'll go in and we will go through different what I always like to equate it to like watching a movie. Maybe we'll skip through to like the highlights, but the person that's in the regression, like they're totally in control of that. I'm really looking to, I pay attention to how you're reacting physically, your expressions, the tone of your voice. Like I'm really listening to a lot of different things. And then as we pull that information, I move you. And it's amazing. We always end up with so much clarity when I work with people. And, sometimes people go into this like, I'm not even sure. Like I've worked with people, they're like, I know there's something there. I want to like figure out what it is, but I'm not sure like what's causing me to have, anger or depression or whatever. And it's always like, it just blows my mind every single time how we will literally get to those moments. And it's like, the light bulb goes off and there's all this clarity. But keep in mind, I always like to let people know, like, you may not access it the first time. I haven't actually experienced that yet. I'll be honest with you. Everybody's been able to go into a past life, but it just depends on each individual person, how much information you're going to pull out. And what's interesting to me is through my own experience and working with other people, I'm not saying people don't have like these amazing past lives, but everybody that I've worked with so far have had very like mundane past lives. Like the events have been very traumatic, but nobody's like living like as a king or queen or anything crazy that you hear a lot of times in past life regression. And not to say that doesn't happen, because it totally does, but I haven't actually experienced anybody in my sessions that are like, oh, I was like, this famous queen or Cleopatra or something like that. But I have witnessed people that have had very traumatic past lives, and these patterns carry over. And that's the thing, is like, we just keep carrying this over. And if you listen to my soulmate podcast a few weeks ago, this is where we can start figuring out like, okay, who are these people that are my karmic partners or my soulmates or my twin flame that I keep repeating these patterns with? And then what happens is, how I put my spin on it, is once we've identified all of this, I go in and I help you do some things to heal. So I will use my healing modalities to help clear chakras. I will help you cut those ties. We do inner child work. There's a lot of different healing modalities that I use when I'm doing past life regression. So that's the other piece to this, is once we have done the past life regression, then we go in and do some healing modalities. And then at the end, we also talk about this, and I usually will give like some suggestions on how to continue this work. Because one of the other things that happens is, once you have come out of the regression, that portal to that space is now open. So a lot of times you'll keep uncovering information. Sometimes for a long time, things will start coming up and you'll just remember things. And so I like to give people tools to work with that. But it's amazing. Like, it's amazing what you will pull out of this. I've had people that I've worked with who have had things happen in this life, and they go back into a past life and they're like, oh my God, I've been doing this with this same person for like many, many lifetimes. And it's given them the courage to be like, okay, now I need to cut these ties and I need to stop this. Especially if you're looking at like, ending patterns. And that's like a big thing right now, right? We're all trying to end these generational and lifetime patterns of trauma and abuse. And especially as women, things that we've been experiencing for many, many lifetimes, we're trying to end that with our generation so that the next generation can have a fresh start, so that we can start healing. And so that's where I feel like this work is so important, because it really takes you back. And we can't really do anything about the past, but we can start to heal, and we can start to set up new patterns. And I believe that this sort of becomes your superpower once you realize it, because then you can pull from all these lifetimes of lessons and go, okay, now I'm empowered. Now this stops. Especially what I've seen a lot of, and maybe it's just what I attract, are, cycles of abuse, especially for women where they've been dominated by men, really allowing this feminine energy to rise up and say, no more, I'm not going to take this anymore. I'm going to, empower myself to break these cycles, and start cutting these karmic ties. And that to me is huge, huge, huge. And you wouldn't even, the amount of clarity and just like relief you get when you realize like this is so much more than just this lifetime. This is something your soul's been carrying around with you. And now we get to stop it. And now we get to start healing that. And so that's a big aspect of my work, is helping people to heal this. I feel very strongly in empowering people to heal themselves. And so that's why I think this work is so important. And so for me personally, this is just full circle. All the years of counseling and healing modalities that I've done have really led me to this moment. The other thing that's really kind of, it kind of scares me a little bit is, I have a fairly extensive background in counseling and life coaching and all of these modalities where I've been trained in. Be really careful if you go to somebody that does past life regression that doesn't have some other training and some counseling or something, because you're pulling straight trauma out. And I think that's the thing that's really given me so much respect for this work, is we're dealing with people's trauma on a soul level. So if you're working with somebody, make sure that they are qualified to help you work through that, or they're referring you to somebody, because this stuff pulls up all kinds of stuff. And if you have had significant trauma in this life, this is going to be a little bit of a trigger probably. And it's something you need, because you need to pull up and we need to cut these ties, but you also need to make sure you have a lot of support. So make sure if you work with somebody that does this type of work, that if they aren't experienced in that and they can't offer you that support, that they are giving you a resource, because you may need to get additional help for this. Also, just with that, be open to the fact that think about this for a second. We're pulling up trauma, especially if you've already had a lot of trauma in this life. It's going to amplify what you've already had happen to you. Right? It's like opening a fresh wound, and it sucks. It's painful. It's difficult, but sometimes that's what we need to heal, right? If we just keep covering it up, it doesn't ever heal. It just sits there and it festers. And so we need to open it up. But with that, you also want to make sure you're supported in that so that you have resources. So if you're working with somebody that's doing past life regression, please make sure that they have the skill set to support you. And one of the other things I'm really big on, and I think this is just because my background as a counselor, they teach you you're not supposed to really give advice. So if somebody's telling you oh, you need to cut this relationship, you need to cut this, you need to do that, be really careful of that, because that's not really what somebody that's doing past life regression should be doing. They should just be supporting you. They should be giving you tools to maybe cut the energetic tie, to cut the trauma, but be really mindful if somebody is telling you hey, you need to cut these people out of your life, because you're the only one who knows how you should handle those situations. And so I just want to put that out there because it makes me a little bit nervous. I know there's a lot of people that do past life regression that are super, super good at what they do. But just like anything, any of the healing modalities, there's people that may be doing this that are diving into some of that trauma aspect that maybe don't have the training and the resources to help you. So, and that's okay if they do it. Just make sure that they're able to give you resources to help you if you need that, if your trauma does, get triggered from that in this lifetime. Because I know personally what it's like to have trauma triggered, and that can send you down a spiral, and that always makes me a little bit nervous. So when I approach this work, I approach it with a ton of respect, and also I'm thinking about that. It's so much more than just like, oh, I'm going to help you remember like a past life. It's like, okay, I know that when I work with somebody and I give them this information and I help them uncover all this, that there is the potential for them to pull up trauma in this life, and they may need extra support. And that's why we have a session afterwards. I'm evaluating, I'm like making sure everybody's good. And then I'm also always here if people need to do a follow-up with me and book a session just to process all that stuff. So just something to think about when you're booking your own past life regression. But holy cow, you guys, it's so fucking powerful. I feel like everybody should be doing this because it gives you so much clarity. I've even been doing some work myself right now, and definitely like these things I've known, but it's given me so much more clarity. I'm like, oh, yep, I knew that. Things I've been kind of just ignoring. So it's pretty awesome. The one thing I do want to just kind of also throw out there is make sure you're emotionally ready to do past life regression. Don't do this in a time when you are just, if you suffer from depression or anxiety, try not to do this during a time when those symptoms are heightened. Even just from personal experience, I did past life regression last week, and I have been struggling so much with my anxiety, and it actually got worse. And I was like, Stephanie, that was so stupid. Like, you know better. Why would you go and pull up something like that when you're in the midst of, high anxiety? I'm ridiculous. So just like a word of caution, think about this for a second. You're pulling up stuff that could be traumatic. So if you're already struggling, maybe hold off on that. Maybe do some healing modalities. So I really like to work with chakras. That's one of the things I really do a lot with people when I'm doing these things. So if you're wanting to work through some of that past life stuff, but you're not quite ready, start with your chakras. We hold all of this stuff in our chakras, especially our lower chakras. So one of the things you'll probably notice is as you start to work on your root and sacral chakra, you're going to be like, I want to know what's causing this. And that, they just go hand in hand. And then you're going to be like, I need to do past life regression. I need to figure out what the fuck is going on. Because we hold all of that in those chakras. So that's a good place to start if you're kind of tiptoeing or you're maybe just not quite ready. Start working on those chakras. And then when you feel ready, try maybe doing some past life regression. So that's that, y'all. If you're interested in booking a past life regression with me, I do everything via Zoom meeting space. So we can do this, and I work with people all over the world. So feel free to check that out on my website, caffeinatedgypsy.com, or you can find me on Instagram, Caffeinated Gypsy. Oh, something totally unrelated that I meant to mention. If you want a mug, I have on my website that I'm only shipping in the United States. If you're in another country and you want a mug, please feel free to reach out to me. I will check into shipping. I know I have a lot of people in Canada. I'm like the whole shipping thing, that's a whole other thing. I don't do well with shipping things. I always seem to have problems. But if you are in Canada, y'all, or anywhere else in the world and you want one, just shoot me a message. I'm happy to look into shipping for you. I don't mind to do that. It was just, I didn't want to put it on my website because I'm trying to figure out shipping prices. And I didn't want to put the wrong price on there for shipping. So any rate, all right, you guys have an amazing day, and thank you for tuning in. Until the next one.
For all the people who judge without knowing, just throw the peace, I tell them good vibes only.